Welcome back, everybody, to the official podcast of the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, Patrolling in Paradise. My name is Gabriella Ruiz, Public Information Officer here at CCSO, and today I am joined by Sergeant Dustin Paille of the Traffic Unit. Sergeant Paille, go ahead and say hello.
Hey, hello.
So today, I'm sure we could sit here and talk about traffic all day long because there is no shortage of traffic tips, if you will. But today we're going to talk specifically about electric modes of transportation, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-motos, mopeds, you name it, we're here to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So I'll just admit, I truthfully don't know much about, all the different laws and statutes pertaining to these modes of transportation. So let's just start at the beginning. Let's talk about electric bikes. Can you explain to me some of the key things that people who own electric bikes need to know?
Yeah, so there's a lot of information, number one, available for people on electric bikes. But when it comes to electric bikes, the law is pretty clear. There's certain classes. There's 3 different classes for e-bikes, classes 1, 2, and 3. In the coming time frame, there's going to be a law that's passed where that's got to be affixed to the bike to make sure that it's readily identifiable for which class it belongs to and things like that. E-bikes themselves are very similar to bicycles with regard to where they can and can't be on the roadway, their position and things like that. So there's not a big difference there. The big difference on e-bikes is how fast some of these e-bikes travel.
Right.
You know,
the big thing with e-bikes that I think we see far too often is they're riding down the sidewalks and people just aren't looking. They're crossing, they're weaving in and out of traffic, and they really don't have regard for their own safety. And I know our agency and our traffic unit, we're going to be sort of cracking down on that. Can you talk about that initiative?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're in about a 30-day period now, and that's really geared towards, it's an education-focused enforcement. And what we're seeing, though, is we are going to be addressing, even during this educational period, we are going to be addressing the behavior of some of these devices, e-bikes included, e-motos and things like that. So we're focusing on the behavior, and we're generally leaving this as an educational period up until that 30-day mark, which should be about the 8th of July. And then we're going to hold the community a little, we're going to hold them a little more accountable for the violations of the law. Right. And that's primarily because we've seen such an explosion of these devices, and this is nationwide. And so our community is no different, and we have the duty to try to protect the citizens and the motoring public. You know, these devices are in and out of traffic, and when you have devices where riders are less protected and they're around the motoring public, inevitably, we're going to end up in some accidents, some crashes and things like that. So what we're trying to do is really focus on making people more safe.
Right. And I know we're specifically talking about electric bicycles and the different types of those, but it's summertime, kids are out of school, parents buy electric bikes for their kids, and maybe they don't think about these laws and regulations. They go to work and kids are out having fun, if you will, and it's a real safety concern because there are, correct me if I'm wrong, there are like added things they can kind of adjust. They can make these bikes go faster than maybe they were originally purchased to do.
Yes, absolutely. So what happens is there are a lot of modifications of scooters and bicycles, e-bikes, things like that are going on, and here in the very near future, that's because we've had such a problem with it. That's going to be written into the law with regard to modifying some of these devices. And truthfully, when somebody, like for an e-bike, for example, a class 3, the top speed on that e-bicycle is 28 miles per hour. Some of these e-bicycles are being modified to travel well in excess of that. And the problem is, aside from the obvious, increased speeds on something that's not designed for that, from the law enforcement end of things, the only definition, because now it exceeds the definition of an e-bicycle, so now the only definition that fits that is a motor vehicle, which requires a driver's license, registration, certain placement on the roadway and not being on the sidewalks and things like that. So we start getting into the criminal violations.
Wow. So that says it all right there. So some of these kids that are driving around on these bikes that exceed that 28-mile-an-hour limit, they don't have the registration. They don't even have driver's licenses, and parents might not be aware of this. How could parents, if their kids do have electric modes of transportation, as a parent, where would you start?
Well, first and foremost, there is a plethora of accurate information online. And I know that, I wouldn't necessarily refer to social media unless it's, say, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. Obviously, we're vetting what we're putting out. We can't possibly put out every single piece of information to cover every single device. But of course, what we put out is accurate. And then on top of that, there's the state websites. There's the Florida statute online process where folks can go and read the definitions, and they can see what they've actually purchased. And on top of that, they can always call the sheriff's office and get some clarification. They can come into one of our district offices and get some clarification on what they bought and what the rights and duties or responsibilities of the operator, so say their children, what the duties and responsibilities are of those kids.
Right. And I know I say kids, but it's not just kids that are out there operating these electric bikes. There's adults that are blatantly disregarding the law as well. As somebody who wants to get information on that and on the laws and regulations, they could go to the same sources to find out. They can call us. They can go on our website.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they can do that. We do see quite a few adult violations as well. With it being summertime, we have a lot of kids that are out on their e-bikes and their scooters and motorized scooters, electric scooters, things like that. We are seeing some of the adults who are modifying some of these devices. It's not uncommon for somebody to have lost their privilege to drive in the state of Florida. For whatever reason, there's a various amount of reasons out there, and they're trying to find ways to get around and kind of skirt that having a driver's license and operating a motor vehicle. But sometimes it's taken to an extreme where the device that they're actually on only meets the criteria or the definition of a motor vehicle in the state of Florida, hence them needing a driver's license when they're operating on the public roadways.
Right. Now, before I forget, I definitely want to circle back to the safety aspect of it, because parents who have kids and adults who are out on these electric bikes, they have to stop and they have to obey traffic laws if they're out on the road, if they're on the sidewalk. And I know I've seen it myself. I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times where they're just zooming right through. They're not paying attention. They're not looking. Maybe they have headphones on. They're listening to music. Can you talk about some of the repercussions of those safety concerns?
Absolutely. Number one, that's a really good point. And what happens is, we'll take an e-bike, for example. And an e-bike, when it's on the public roadway, that device has the duties and responsibilities of a motor vehicle, meaning it might be an e-bicycle, but at the end of the day, when it comes up to a stop sign, it's supposed to stop for that stop sign. It's supposed to yield to oncoming traffic. Lane position is important. All these sorts of things. And where bicycles and e-bikes, where there's a big difference is, number one, are they allowed on sidewalks in Charlotte County? They are. And but their duties and responsibilities change to that of a pedestrian, meaning, so they go from being on the public roadway on an e-bike, where their duties and responsibilities are that of a motor vehicle, and to on a sidewalk where now their duties and responsibilities are that of a pedestrian, meaning they come up to a crosswalk and they're a signalized crosswalk. They're supposed to push the button, wait for the timing on that intersection to allow them through that crosswalk. And A lot of that is not happening, and I think a lot of these folks that are out there, maybe they don't know. I think a lot of folks maybe just don't realize that there's a difference there. And we see some where we have to target the behavior, some that are pretty obvious and they don't care. So those are dealt with in a little different manner. And to your point about, say, bicycles, with the summertime and kids being on these devices, sometimes we're dealing with kids 12, 13, 14 years old
Right.
that have not been to driver's ed. They haven't been to a driver's challenge. They haven't learned anything about driving a motor vehicle on the roadway. I know they know what a stop sign means, but when it comes to their duties and responsibilities when they're on a public roadway, they don't know all the nuances that those that are trained in driving to get their driver's license
Right.
know and are aware of.
Right. And as a driver in Charlotte County, it's nerve-wracking, especially, early morning hours going to work when the sun's not quite up, or even late at night when the sun's going down. Coming up to a stoplight where there's a crosswalk, it's like, oh my goodness, is there going to be an e-bike that just whips past? Because I know I've seen it several times. And have you seen traffic crashes where people on e-bikes are seriously injured?
Absolutely. And we've seen them on the roadway. We've got all the variations that you could think of. We've seen them in the crosswalks. We've seen them occur when someone's running the crosswalk. And on top of that, we've got some laws with distracted driving and things, but at the end of the day, these folks are putting themselves in a time and place on a roadway that increase the chances for bad things to happen. And like you mentioned, our twilight hours in the morning, in the evening, things like that, it's harder enough for people to see. And let's face it, there's a lot of people on their phones when they're driving as well. So, when you add all these little things together, it's a recipe for disaster. And that's why the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has taken a bit of a firmer stance on these vehicles, these devices. And, we are attempting to do everything that we can to keep the citizens and visitors of Charlotte County safe.
Absolutely. And as you know, Sheriff Permel is fed up. He is sick and tired of seeing these operators of electric modes of transportation blatantly disregard the law, not know the rules for parents, to not know what their kids are out there doing. And basically he just wants to take this 30-day period, like you mentioned, and educate, but then really step up the enforcement.
Yeah, I agree. And what happens is it might seem like a bit of a firm stance, but I don't think the public tends to see the things that public safety is seeing when it comes to these crashes and these kids and adults and people really getting injured out on the roadway. With fire, EMS, law enforcement, we see it, and I think a lot of times we get into that. Well, I don't see it as often as a citizen in the county. They don't see that as often. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind to a certain degree. But because we do see it, we know the value in educating the public. And when the education is not working, we see the value in taking that firmer stance, issuing the citations, things that ultimately we're looking for that change in behavior. And for a lot of people, unfortunately, it seems like that point may not be driven home until they're issued a citation or charged for their violation of the law.
Right. Now, speaking of the violation of the law, there is a criminal aspect, if you will, of people on e-bikes of all ages fleeing from law enforcement.
Yes.
I know, as you know, we posted a video that has some short clips of both dash cam and body cam of our deputies here in Charlotte County and what they've seen. And a couple of those clips show people lights and sirens. They don't care. They're running. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, for some reason, that type of behavior has, at least in my observation, that has increased. Where I think years ago we would have been far less likely to see that kind of behavior out of these people, and we're seeing it now, and we have, number one, we're trying to enforce the law where something that could have just been a simple ticket, now with that person fleeing is now an arrestable offense where we are absolutely going to take them to jail. And, unfortunately, we run into these circumstances where some of those folks are juveniles. And, as much as you don't like to do that because they're a juvenile, we have to enforce the law. And when it comes to that fleeing behavior, it's obvious. I mean, our cars are better equipped than they've been in years. I mean, just the technology, our lights are very bright. Our siren is very loud. Our cars are readily identifiable. Our officers are in uniform. And, it's amazing to me that some of these people will, kind of take their life because now they're just going to run from the cops on top of their law violation, which could have just been a ticket or something along those lines. So something that we take very seriously, and we are going to make sure that we do everything that we can to put a stop to that.
Right, and this is another point for adults and parents of children to educate themselves on the seriousness of this, and there are serious consequences if you flee. I know, like you said, I'm sure you don't like to take a 12, 13, 14-year-old to jail, but this is necessary because when it comes to these modes of transportation, it could literally be life or death if they don't follow the law.
I agree, and it is, and we see it, unfortunately, and that's the ultimate goal is trying to reduce number one the calls for service, but the end goal is trying to reduce those amount of crashes, or the amount of crashes that involve these devices. At the end of the day, it's about people's safety. It's about protecting people. And yes, and to your point, I would prefer not to take a 12 or 14-year-old to jail. But if you flee, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Right. Now, we started talking about electric bicycles, but I want to make sure we kind of at least touch a little bit on each different mode of electric transportation. And I know there's so many different terms, and e-bike and e-moto and e-scooter, and truthfully, I don't know how you keep them all categorized. But in terms of go-karts and different types of those electric vehicles, if you will, can you speak on those?
Yeah, so there's a lot of devices that are, I would classify them as toys, and those are great fun on private property where you have permission to be. It's when some of those things, number one, they're not designed for the roadway at all. There's not a group of laws or anything that clearly defines some of the toys. And that falls into many categories. Some of these drifter carts and scooters and go-karts and things like that, they're simply not designed for the roadway. Motorists are not expecting them to be on the roadway. And then on top of that, they're also very low to the ground and harder for motorists to see. So
For sure.
great devices, great fun, it just at the appropriate place. That's the big key takeaway from some of those devices.
Right. And I know there are specific devices that actually say off-road use only. And they're not roadway safe. They're not meant for the roadways. And like you mentioned, there's no specific laws or statutes that allow them to be there. So if someone has an e-bike, or if they purchase an e-scooter or a toy, it's their responsibility to find out what specifically they have and find out the laws and everything surrounding that mode of transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. And in today's day and age, there's a lot of information available online and accurate information from these manufacturers. There's so many popular manufacturers of these devices that we're seeing out on the roadway that a quick search will simply show this manufacturer is saying it's not for road use. It's for off-road use or not for use on public roadways, things like that. And so they're clearly, a lot of these devices are not designed to be on the roadway at all.
Yeah. And I know this might be harsh to say, but we live in a day and age where I know we were talking before the podcast started, and everyone has a cell phone in their pocket. They really can't play the ignorance card on this one. They can take the time to look it up. They can take the time to learn the laws. And like we mentioned before, call the sheriff's office, find out, go to our website, go to our Facebook page, our social media pages. Take the time now, because nobody wants a citation. Nobody wants any of that. And I'm sure you want to see a reduction in these citations and people getting hurt. So it's their responsibility, whether you're a parent or whether you're an owner, to learn the law and take the time to educate yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of that information is available prior to the purchase. And so doing that research prior to the purchase, some of these devices, we're talking about, from, a couple $100 up to a few thousand and $5,000 and $6,000. So some of these things are quite an investment. And doing that research ahead of time would really help. That would help give them the idea of whether or not this is something that's roadworthy or not. And then for the folks that already have these devices, the same amount of research would tell you exactly where that should be, whether or not it can be on the roadway, number one. And if it can, then there's plenty of resources out there available to tell you where you should be on the roadway and what your duties and responsibilities are. I mentioned the e-bike thing earlier, and that there's a big difference when somebody somebody's on an e-bike or a regular bicycle for that matter, and they're on the roadway, and those duties and responsibilities change. So all that information is available. Doing the research ahead of time would help parents prior to the purchase, and for even the parents or guardians that now already have kids or children that are using these devices. Doing the research now at this point, it's sometimes it's as quick as doing 15 minutes on the cell phone, and all the information's right there at our fingertips.
So it is summertime, and we know that kids are out and they want to have fun and they want to ride around on their scooter, their bike, their go-kart, whatever it is. We're not stepping up this enforcement to ruin their summer or to ruin their fun. We're stepping up this enforcement so that they can stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of fun to be had, and for some reason that fun is spilling over into the public streets and roadways, and that's where we see the problem.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about golf carts, because I know there is some confusion on all types of electric modes of transportation, and we talk about e-bikes and e-scooters and e-motos, but golf carts is actually roped into that definition. Can you talk about the golf cart usage?
Yeah, so golf carts, it's a good topic to bring up. And so if someone were to just look at, Florida Sunshine Online, the Florida statutes, they would see a lot of regulations in there about golf carts. And what happens is, so that covers state law. And in Charlotte County in particular, that has been, there's been an ordinance that passed years ago. And this is very common across the state. And what happens is the golf cart usage on public roadways has been limited to golf cart communities. Now, these are communities where the county goes in and makes sure that the golf cart signage and the roadways are designed a certain way and things like that. And there's all these additional safety aspects that go into making golf cart communities. But in Charlotte County, the bridgeless barrier islands, golf carts can be on the roadway. And then there's 5 communities. We'll take Babcock Ranch, for example, So what happens is the county, they apply to get their community labeled as a golf cart community. And the county, sets, certain safety features in place. And once that's done, it's open and available per our county ordinance for golf carts to be on the roadway. So without being one of those 5 communities or a bridgeless barrier island, golf carts are actually prohibited on the roadway. A good segue into that, so that's for golf carts themselves. We also have low-speed vehicles. Now, this looks very similar to a golf cart. In fact, for all intents and purposes, it would be a golf cart. However, to be registered as a low-speed vehicle, it does require some additional safety features, headlights and tail lights and blinkers, that sort of thing. And as long as that, what would otherwise be a golf cart, as long as that device has all those safety features, they can go down and get what would otherwise be a golf cart registered as a low-speed vehicle. But a golf cart by itself, no additional safety features, no registration or anything like that, cannot be on the public roadway in Charlotte County outside of one of our 5 golf cart communities or our bridgeless barrier islands.
Wow.
Yeah.
So with these 5 communities, do these golf carts have to have those specific safety features that you mentioned, the brake lights, the blinkers, within those communities as well?
They don't. It's always a good idea to have those additional safety features, but these are communities that have installed, or the county has installed this additional safety, meaning like a reduction in speed limits and all this additional signage.
Okay.
So that helps, and so they're not required to have all those additional safety features in there. Although, of course, the more the merrier. It's
Right.
much better, much safer, but not required. They can be a strict, what would otherwise be your typical golf cart on a golf course. If it's inside one of those communities, it can be on the roadway.
Okay. So there's so many, especially because we live in Florida. I mean, golf carts are everywhere. We have golf cart stores. I know I see them all over the place. And it might be confusing for some people, like if they think, oh, I'm just going from my community and I'm cutting through a parking lot and I'm just running up to the store really quick. It sounds like that's not allowed.
So that's what I was talking about was on the public roadway. So we do have some golf course communities that are private property, and they adjoin a shopping center, say, that's also private property, but open to the public. Now, much of this has to do with the golf cart being on the public roadway. So when one of these golf carts travels from private property onto additional private property, because it's not on the public roadway, that would not necessarily constitute a violation, short of everything else being
Right.
the same. You know, there's traffic violations that can be enforced on private property, especially that private property that's open to the public. But the device itself traveling through the parking lot, or the golf cart in this case, would not necessarily constitute a violation. Where we're seeing the violations is when that golf cart is on the public roadway, is on the sidewalks. Now we're dealing with violations of the law.
Right. So as long as they're staying on that private property, then they're okay.
They're
But
okay.
once they exit private property and maybe try to go a little farther past a shopping center, that's when it becomes a problem.
That's correct. And also on the golf cart topic, a lot of questions that we get are related to side-by-sides. And there was some legislature that was going through that was going to attempt to pass for side-by-sides to be registered in the state of Florida, and that did not go through. So the way the law sits now is, even though a side-by-side is very similar to a golf cart or a low-speed vehicle, side-by-sides rather, are prohibited from being on the roadway completely at this point. We have seen an uptick in, without using the website's name, there's websites online that will register a side-by-side in another state, and it's sort of a loophole where folks think that they can get their side-by-side registered in another state and then put a tag on it, and now they're legal in the state of Florida. And at the end of the day, this business is in the business of making money, so they will accept your money, and they will imply that it might be legal for you to drive this side-by-side on the roadway in the state of Florida, and it's simply not the case.
Oh my goodness. So it seems like there's all different types of ways that people are trying to find loopholes. Could you explain to me, I know we were talking about it before, and forgive me, I don't know the exact which one it was, but we were talking about people can buy pedals and add them to it, and they think that that's like another loophole because there's something in there that says if it has pedals, then it qualifies as an electric bicycle.
That's correct. So, and now we're getting into the e-motos or an electric motorcycle realm. And for some reason, this is one of our most popular or most often seen violation is dealing with e-motos or e-motorcycles. And so many of these devices are being purchased for some reason, and these kids are taking them out on the roadway and out on the sidewalk where they are completely prohibited. And then for the loophole, just like I mentioned about the side-by-sides, people get pretty creative. And if they, it seems like if this time was just diverted to trying to stay within the law, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But
Right.
nevertheless, yeah. So we're seeing where folks are adding pedals to an e-moto, and the fact that they add pedals does not change the definition of what the device is that they're on. Now, there was a misconception that if they add pedals to an e-moto, now they're dealing with an e-bike or an e-bicycle. However, we've seen pedals that are just simply added with no chain or no way to make this device, pedalable. And then we've also seen where they've actually gone through the process of adding the pedals and the chain to something that is not prohibited on the roadway anyway. So they've succeeded in being able to pedal a device that has also got a motor on it that exceeds the classification for an e-scooter or an e-bicycle, and it's still not legal. So they've gone through a lot of time and effort and ingenuity to attempt to find a loophole in the system, and it doesn't change the powerful device that they're on.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like all of these websites and adding pedals and adding a chain and doing all of this, it seems like it's much more complicated than it would be to just figure out what laws apply to your bike or scooter or moto and follow those.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of that is the cool factor, if you will. It's kind of just what we refer to as, some of these devices don't look as cool as something that looks like a motocross dirt bike that's on the roadway. So I think that's part of it, and and then on top of that, we're dealing with, say, an electric scooter, for example. That has a top speed by law of 20 miles an hour. It can't even have the capability of traveling more than 20 miles per hour. And for some of these kids, that's just not good enough. So where they could go out and have fun and be on a device that meets the definition of an electric scooter at 20 miles an hour or less, they're just trying to exceed that for some reason, and that's where we're also running into additional problems.
Yeah, they want to push that boundary, and it's fun. I mean, I'm sure we get it. It's not to say that we don't understand that it's fun to go fast, and it's fun to be on these bikes and these motorcycles, and it's fun to look cool, but it's just not safe, and it's just not following the law.
Yeah, I agree, and some of the kids don't necessarily have the realization yet, but some of our public is literally they're driving up to an intersection and they're not anticipating this device coming at them at 30 or 40 miles an hour. They're looking for traffic, right? They're pulled up to their stop sign or their red light, and they're keeping their eye out for traffic and pedestrians, and all of a sudden there's this thing that they thought was a pedestrian who's walking at them, and no, it's actually an e-moto that's coming at them at 30 miles an hour, and it's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, as a driver, like I said before, I've seen it. I've come up to a stoplight and watched someone on an e-bike or an e-moto just zoom right across and not even look. And I think that's the most terrifying part as a driver in Charlotte County is, oh my goodness, I'm just on my way to work, or oh my goodness, I'm just going to the grocery store, and I could end up seriously injuring somebody or, God forbid, killing them with my vehicle just because they're not following the laws and the rules that they're supposed to.
Right, and that's the big takeaway from this is the safety aspect, and it's people that are out on these devices are less protected, And then the motoring public, nobody wants to seriously injure someone else.
No.
You know, the vast majority of our public is simply trying to get to and from work and things like that, and not anticipating this, and to have them be involved in this accident, where many times maybe it's not the motor vehicle's fault. That person still has to live with injuring somebody else, or like you mentioned, God forbid, it's happened here, and it's. You know, this is what we're trying to cut down is killing somebody. You know, this person still has to live with, the fact that they've killed somebody on the roadway. So that's the big focus. You know, we're trying to get a hold of this to where we can stop these interactions from happening. You know, these unanticipated interactions or collisions. You know, between these e-motos and our motoring public.
Right. Now, I'm sure we could sit here and truthfully talk all day, like I mentioned, about traffic and these electric motos and scooters and bicycles and what have you. In the future, very soon, you are going to be doing Traffic Tip Tuesdays, where you're going to go in depth, and we're going to have you kind of talk even more specifically on each one of these modes of transportation. And that is something else that our public can look on our social media pages for. Is we'll talk about the toys, we'll talk about the electric bikes, we'll talk about the scooters, we'll talk about the golf carts, and give specific details pertaining to each one of these. And that's all a part of this step up in enforcement, and that's all a part of trying to keep our county safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot of information from the law enforcement side when we're trying to explain the differences in some of these devices. There's just so much information to be had, and that's why, talking earlier about, parents or people just doing some of the research for their particular device is ultimately great for them, because they're dealing with that one device. They're doing all the research they can on that one device and getting the information straight from the law, straight from the sheriff's office, things like that. But that Traffic Tip Tuesday is definitely a way where we're going to expand this conversation a little further, provide some additional information and resources and definitions, and really try to lay out the duties and responsibilities where these things can and can't be, depending on what it is. We've touched on a lot of topics today, but taking that deeper dive will really be educational, I think, for the people, and give them a better idea of what it is they can and can't do on their particular device.
Right. And my goal on this side of the house is to flood our social media and flood all of our pages with the resources that people can use, so that way they can't claim that they didn't know, or that they didn't see it, or they didn't know where to go, because we want to make sure that at every turn, on every page that they have on their little computer in their pocket, that they can find what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's just so much information out there, right? And so having the information put out by us, we're going to put out as much as we possibly can as an agency. We're doing our due diligence. We are trying to put out so much information, and inevitably, there's going to be some device or something somewhere where we may not know to talk about that particular device, but that's where that self-accountability should kick in for this device owner. We're going to do everything that we can to give the people additional resources and information so that they know what they can and can't do.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Sergeant Paille, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us and your continued efforts that are going to be coming in Traffic Tip Tuesdays. We appreciate you and the wealth of knowledge that you have and your willingness to share it with the public.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Patrolling in Paradise, and we will see you next time.